get us started, jump right in. We have a very informational meeting lined up for tonight. Some updates to give, and I look forward at a closer point to a decision-making, point of the timeline. So tonight's going to be a heavy informational, maybe not heavy, but it'll be an important informational evening. Just want to thank everyone for being here. And let's take roll, or how, excuse me, can you remind me how we've been doing roll? How did we do it the two before tonight?
I don't remember. Emily, I don't know. Do you remember how we did it?
I think, Javier, you did it.
I have the list here. I can take roll. We didn't do it in the previous two meetings tonight, but I'm happy to go down the list if you want me to.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's do that quickly, and then after that, we'll go straight to Mark or whoever's leading the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Emma.
So Rodriguez.
Present.
Angie Taylor.
Present.
Lita Semrau. Jennifer Dubell.
Present.
Jennifer Babu. Laura Russell Better.
Here.
Laura Fries.
Here.
Elizabeth LaPierre. Oh, there. Sarah McMath. Anne Dalpine.
Here.
Kaya Salih. Nope. Christina Smith. And Michael Loring.
Liz LaPierre is here. I didn't get to unmute myself fast enough. Sorry about that.
So great. And Roberta, you're not quite off the hook yet here with your MC responsibilities. We have approval of the prior meeting minutes.
Yes, we do. Let me pull them up. All right. So consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting on, can you read me the date of the meeting? So
October 22nd.
Of approving the minutes of October 22nd. Is there a motion? I can't see everyone's hands. I see Laura Fries, second by Sarah McMath. Are there any questions on the motion? Any question on the minutes? I can't see everyone's faces, so just go ahead and unmute yourself if there's any questions. I don't see any questions. Is there any discussions on the minutes? And seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of October 22nd, please indicate, and we can do a hands raised vote. If we can bring the screen back to the grid view. And we'll just kind of show it, just so that we can show it on the video. Perfect. And that looks unanimous. Not all at once, but we all kind of went up at one point. Great. And so we've approved the minutes. I think that does end the MC responsibilities on my part. So I'll hand it off to Mark for the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Roberto. So as Roberta suggested, that this is largely information. What has happened since our October 22nd meeting was that we had an election. And with that election, we had a slate of local questions, including question C, which was the Green New Deal. And it is a consideration that we talked about a little bit at our October 22nd meeting. And so we're going to cover a little bit of ground that we covered prior to the election night on November 3rd. But we're also going to kind of bring everyone up to speed on what some of the conversation has been around it and its potential impact for the Presumpscot project. And so that's largely what our conversation is focused on tonight. This presentation follows on an update that we had in a conversation we had with the school board and the DABC. And so our kind of order has been meeting with the successive boards to ensure that everyone's informed, has the same information. Part of the challenge of all that is that we're receiving information on a very regular basis. And but what we'll do is bring everyone up to speed on kind of the conversations that have been had. I know that there's a newspaper article about the potential impact that that actually was taken from the conversation that was had at the DABC meeting last week. And so that's some of the information that was actually fairly well presented in the paper. I think there's been a lot of conversation outside of the article. I'm not sure how accurate all that has been, but the article actually fairly accurately represented the conversations that we've had. So with that, I will move into this, and I will keep my eyes posted on the both the chat and on the panel board, so that if there are questions that are raised during the conversation, that we'll pause and address those questions. If I don't hear you because I can't see something, certainly someone can interrupt me. That's and we'll take a pause at that time. So the Green New Deal and its impact to the project. So it's important to realize that the Green New Deal is an update to an existing building ordinance. And so the City of Portland already has a green building code that we are required to comply with. And that green building code is why we've been looking at LEED for the projects. And so I think we've shared with you in our previous updates how we're complying with LEED and achieving LEED Silver. And so, but the Green New Deal changes the currently on the books the Green Building Code in a couple of significant ways. And the ways in which it changes them fall both into the construction category and to the project design category. Under the construction category, what it means to contractors that work on projects that have to comply with the again, it doesn't apply to every project, but in the City of Portland, but it does apply to projects that are funded or used by the city, and so that's why it's applied to the school projects. These are funded through the BFOF bond, and there's certainly can make an argument that the programs are city programs. So the construction means that the contractors are required to hire a certain percentage of their workforce has to be apprentices, and that it spells out the percentage of the workers that need to be. That's currently not a requirement in the Green Building Code, so that would be an additional requirement of the Green New Deal. And we don't know the impact of that would have on construction costs. Most contractors in certain trades, like electrical contractors and plumbers and mechanical contractors, they already have a percentage of their workforce that they have that are apprentices. So there may be an impact in telling them that they have to have a certain number, though. The next piece is that there are a requirement to comply, that contractors comply with fair wage rates at the state and local level. I think everyone will remember, or maybe not. We've talked about this before, that the school department, in going forward with the Lights House project, made a determination, or that we were going to require contractors to comply with fair wage rates, and so that's already been an aspect that we have required or building into the requirements of the project. So that really isn't going to change anything that we were already contemplating. And lastly, the impact to the contractor, the Green New Deal states that employees on the project have to undergo OSHA training. Most contractors require their contractors or their employees to undergo OSHA training anyway, so we don't think that's a significant impact to the projects. So those are the three requirements that the Green New Deal changes the current ordinance and increasing the requirements for contractors. Under the design end of it, it has a couple of important considerations, two big ones. One it has to do with the energy requirements of the project. And so the current green building code states that you have to exceed, for projects that are over 10,000 square feet, you have to exceed the Maine uniform building and energy code requirements. You have to exceed them by 25% for renovations. And they use the Maine uniform building and energy code uses the 2010 version of the energy standard. The green building code says you have to use the most recently published edition of that energy standard, and that is the 2019 version of it. There's a big difference in the energy requirements under the 2010 and the 2019 version of that same energy standard. So they've changed a lot in 9 years. And that has a big impact in terms of the energy performance of our projects and potentially what we would have to do to comply. And we'll get into that in a little bit more in a minute. The other component is that the projects have to comply with the requirement for Better Roofs program. And there are two ways you can comply. One is that 15% of your roof has to be set aside to be solar ready. And solar ready means that it can't be in a shaded area, and so that it has to be capable, it has to be free of equipment so that you could put solar equipment on your roof. It only requires that 15% of your total roof has to be set aside for that. So that's a new requirement of the Green New Deal. You can also, in lieu of doing the solar requirement, you can actually do a vegetative roof. So you could do a green roof. And so that's another way of complying with the Better Roofs program. So those are the two big impacts on the design side of the Green New Deal to the current ordinance. So when we looked at this initially in the referendum question C, we looked at would the Green New Deal apply to this project, and when does it take effect? And so we further looked into the fact that it takes effect 30 days from certification of the vote. And so the vote was on November 3rd, and so well, I don't know if it was certified on that evening. It certainly that was the day of sort of the vote. So we've been looking at 30 days from November 3rd, and that's when we're assuming that the ordinance, the new provisions of the Green New Deal take effect. So that's one consideration was, will it apply to us, and when does it apply to us? And so we'll get a little further into some of that in a minute here. But the other consideration was, is there any way that we could be exempted from the requirements of that? And there's language that says that the planning director can exempt the requirements on grounds of technical infeasibility, and that means that there would be some technical aspect of the building itself that would prohibit us from implementing these requirements, the energy requirements or the roof requirement. And we don't think that there is anything that would prohibit us from being able to comply. So we don't think that there's a grounds for technical infeasibility. So
Mark, there's a question. Comment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yep. So the question is 15% of new structure or the entire structure for the roof? That's a good question. So the issue is that it's 15% of the roof, and so it would be we assume it to be the entire building. The good news is that for Presumpscot, our additions are sized such that they're much larger than 15% of the roof, and so it wouldn't be very difficult. And we're building them to be able to support a solar installation. So we think that's something that we kind of already would be able to comply with. So thank you. So then the next thing looks at we started to reach out to the school district's legal counsel to help us understand some of the interpretation of these requirements and their applicability to the Presumpscot project, or to actually all three of the BFOF projects. And so first it was digging into whether or not these projects are defined such that they would need to comply with the provisions of the Green Building Code, because that's essentially what this is. And so, and so on first pass, yes, they do need to comply with the Green Building Code, and that's really wrapped up in the last bullet item here, which the Green Building Code requires projects, again, that are funded or used by the city that new or renovation projects that are funded or used, that they then have to comply with the provisions of this Green Building Code. There's a couple important aspects there. One of them is the definition of new or renovation. Definition of new is fairly simple. Definition of renovation is defined as a project where the construction costs of the project exceed the value of the property, and so that's an important consideration, because the Lyseth project, for instance, did not need to comply with the Green Building Code because the property included both Lyman Moore and Lyseth schools, and the value of that property with the schools and the lot that they sit on was larger than the construction costs. And so it was the Lyseth project in some ways didn't meet the threshold of a renovation. So Presumpscot, because we're adding a lot to it, and the construction value, the subsequent construction value is a fair amount. The property value is such that we're quite certain that that we exceed the assessed or the value of the property, and so that means that the Green Building Code does apply to the Presumpscot project. We're looking right now at its application to Reiki, where we think right now that Reiki may be valued, the building and the lot are valued higher than the construction costs for the Reiki project. So the likelihood is that we may not have to, and again, this is all May, we're still sorting things out, but we may not have the requirement of the Green Building Code apply to the Reiki project. But like I said, it does apply to Presumpscot. So the next piece is looking at, okay, now it applies, does the requirement for the better roofs and the energy improvement of the Green New Deal, and there's a threshold value of 5,000 square feet, so that projects that exceed 5,000 square feet have to comply with the energy and the better roofs requirement. And so what the language says that all new construction and renovation projects owned or occupied by the City of Portland, or to be funded in whole or in part by the City of Portland, that are of 5,000 square feet in floor area. And we're still kind of looking at the interpretation. Does that mean that it's 5,000 square feet of a new construction, or 5,000 square feet of the full project, or 5,000 square feet of new to renovation? So that's a little bit of an area of interpretation that the lawyers are helping us sort out a little bit as well. The Presumpscot project, the additions are much larger than 5,000 square feet. So even if it applies just to the new, it means that we will have to comply with the better roof. We would have, if the Green New Deal, we would have to comply with the better roofs and the energy requirements. The current Green Building Code means that threshold is 10,000 square feet. Again, we still exceed 10,000 square feet, but it means that we don't have the 2019 Energy Code requirement. So the current requirement is the 2010, and there is no better roof requirement for the current Green Building Code. And I'll pause there for a minute so if people have any questions about that. So, and we may illustrate some of this, make it a little clearer in the next few slides here. So, and this is if a couple scenarios here. One scenario we were looking at was, would the Green New Deal update apply to, in the Green Building Ordinance, apply to all areas of all three schools? And so that would mean that the aspects of the energy upgrades, the green roofs or the Better Roofs program, that would apply to all areas, and not just the new areas, but the full building of all of them. So that was scenario one. Scenario two is that if Reiki doesn't have to comply, either because the additions are less than the 5,000 square feet, or because the value of the property is such that it exceeds the construction cost, then it would be that the Green New Deal applies to Longfellow and Presumpscot. So that's scenario two, and it would be all areas. It would be the existing school building as well as the additions. And then there's a third scenario where it would only apply to the additions of both Longfellow and Presumpscot. So those are three scenarios that we're contemplating. How is this going to impact our projects? And if the energy requirements are what we're looking at, and they are the new energy requirements of the 2019 energy standard, we have to invest more into the project than we currently are planning to invest. And how much is that? In a worst case, if we had to do it to all three schools, we're looking at $6 million construction cost. And so that was where I think a figure that was published in the paper that came from our conversations prior were from, that at the sort of rough order of magnitude to upgrade the insulation and the tightness of the building, exterior building envelope, we call it, the walls and the roof and windows, that exterior shell, that would be on the order of $2.5 million to upgrade that, as well as mechanical systems that heat the building and provide fresh air. So that would be $2.5 million construction cost for Reiki, $2 million for Longfellow, and $1.5 million for Presumpscot. The reason it's really a function of how large the buildings are, and so that's why those numbers are what they are. And so what that was, our first pass at this was saying, if that's $6 million is the worst case scenario, and if that applies to the project, that's in totality, that's about a sixth of our total construction cost for the three schools. And we were sort of taking a pause and saying, if that's the case, there's really going to be a potential redesign, because we'll have to take money and apply it to the envelope upgrades and mechanical upgrades that we weren't planning on doing, which means we have to reduce some other areas that we were going to improve. And so that was sort of the first consideration, the worst case scenario. And that's scenario one. If right now it looks again as if Reiki doesn't need to comply with that requirement. So the worst case scenario is about a $3.5 million upgrade to comply with the Green New Deal. So that's sort of, again, looking at tightening up the envelope, adding insulation to the walls and the roof, and putting in high efficiency mechanical systems. There was some conversations of, can we fast track the project so that we could get in under the current green building code and not these energy requirements of the new Green New Deal. So that was a follow-up, and we looked at that, and we have submitted the projects to planning board, and then the process is that we, after submitting to the planning board and getting through the planning process, then we go through the permitting process. So the building permit itself is separate from the site application, which is what the planning board looks at. The planning board looks at the site and how the project at that level works, and then the code enforcement looks at the details of the building and how we comply with building code. That happens after the planning board looks at the project. So that's the consideration we were looking at is how much do we need to go into that process to be complying with the existing ordinance versus would be not fit into that submission process, and then that submission process happens after the new ordinance takes effect, after those 30 days from the vote. This was our time frame looking at it, and it's kind of tough to see, but the bars are the Presumpscot one. We submitted to the planning board back in late September on the Presumpscot project, and so that's been submitted for quite some time. We have not yet got onto planning board agenda for the public hearing on that project, and so that's still in that planning board submission where we haven't moved into the planning board approval, and it's likely that we won't be through the planning board approval by the time the new ordinance takes effect. And so this schedule shows the planning board submission as the light green, the planning board approval as an orange bar, and once we have the planning board approval, then it moves into the building permit submission and review, which is shown in blue, and then we go to bid the projects, and so those are the red bars. And so right now we're looking at staggering the bids, but again, that's a conversation that we'll update everyone as we get a little closer to the bidding phase of this as well. But we've effectively paused the projects right now to understand what the impacts of the Green New Deal and the Green Building Code have on the project, and whether or not we have to do any redesign because of the increase in cost to comply. So, like I said, we're kind of paused right here, and we'll see what these impacts are. I'll pause for a minute myself here to see if there are any questions before I move. Just the next couple slides are questions that were asked at the school board and at the DABC level, so you can have a sense of some of the follow-up that we've been doing since since the vote, and what we've been looking at a little bit more detail. All right.
Mark, sorry, I just put it in the chat, but why is the building permit submission period for Presumpscot so much longer than the other two schools?
Yeah, all right, Laura, good question here. I'll go back to that for a second. It's not necessarily that it's any longer, it's just simply we have more time, because what we're trying to do is, and this is part of the conversation about the phasing of our bids, or the staggering of our bids. And so one consideration I think we've been talking about would be that we would bid all three schools at one time. So a contractor could come in and they would bid on all three. What we've learned through subsequent conversations with many of the contractors is that they don't have the workforce to be able to bid and do all three projects. And so our pool of contractors would be very small. So one of the considerations we're looking at is, if we were to stagger the bids, if a contractor went after one project and didn't get it, they aren't necessarily immediately thrown out of the pool. They could bid on the second project or the third project. So that's why we're showing those. The reason in the order that we're showing them, the only thing that we're looking at right now, and this order may change, but what we're looking at is Presumpscot has the most flexibility in some respects with the order that we start the project, because the additions, what we're going to do is essentially move the modulars that are there, and then we're going to start the construction of the additions. Well, while we're doing the construction of the additions, we're not displacing anyone. The other two schools, we're constantly displacing people to create swing space to do their interior renovations, where in Presumpscot, it's the shortest construction duration, because we don't have that phasing aspect of moving people out, renovating, moving people back in, and creating that. So that's why we see that Presumpscot is the last one staggered, because it has the least impact by sliding it out a little further to the overall project schedule.
Okay, super, thank you.
So the school board impact was, can we get an expedited review by the planning board? And the reason we were looking at that is so then we could get through the permitting process, or get into the permitting process. And that means that we would only have to comply with the current Green Building Code and not the provisions of the new Green Deal. So that was sort of the first question. Can we fast track things to get? And we haven't been able to as of yet. They're very busy. There's reduced hours on the part of some staff, and so and there's a lot of projects going through the planning board right now. So So we don't think we can get fast track approval on the planning board. But I guess I will say that all of the projects have been submitted to the planning board, and that's important for, as we'll talk about in a minute here. The second question was around the getting the school's counsel, their legal counsel, looking at the formal interpretation of the ordinance impacts, and that's kind of what I've shared with you. And so so they've been helping us understand some of the legal interpretations of the Green New Deal and its applicability. One said that one consideration was that can we move forward with the Reiki project on the assumption that the changes won't apply to that school, either because the value of the property was higher than the construction cost, or because the new additions are below that 5,000 square feet, because the Reiki school, it doesn't have a very large addition, it has a small addition on the front for the entrance and a stair. So that's that. But what we were a little hesitant to do is look at one project in isolation. And so the idea was to look at the impact of the Green New Deal across all projects before there was a consideration to move forward with one, because we've been very careful to think about equity across all of the schools. Then there was also a question, can we communicate with the city council and the mayor about potential postponement of the implementation? Because at that time there was some conversation that the minimum wage requirements would be postponed too. And so that was a follow-up request, or we followed up with that on that request and determined that there's absolutely no way that we could postpone. No one has the authority to postpone the implementation of the new requirements. So last week we met with the DABC, and again, as I said, this was the feedback we got from that was published in the story in the newspaper, and so some of the conversations after the presentation we made to the DABC was: is there a possibility of deferring some of this work while alternate financing is worked out? So the idea is that if there's energy improvements that we could fund somehow with separate funds from the BFOF bond funds, could we say, well, we're gonna comply, but it's going to be on a separate project with separate funds? And so that's actually one that the lawyers looked at a little further and think that there was potential merit to that, or is potential merit to that. Another consideration was the possibility that someone stated that in the past, it's once you've submitted to the planning and paid your invoice, you are considered in process and you would be exempt from the new ordinances. And that one was one that we're looking at very carefully, because as I stated, we've submitted Presumpscot back at the end of September, and we've submitted now all 3 of the schools to the planning board. And so the idea is that if this is the case, that we would only have to comply with the Green Building Code as it's currently enacted, and not the provisions of the Green New Deal that take effect in early December. So that right now is sort of an area that we're exploring pretty heavily. That may be the case, that we don't need to do the greater energy requirements, because those are the new requirements that we'd only have to comply with the 2010 energy standard. So that would be an important consideration. So we would kind of stay on track with how we were designing it and not have to change the designs, if that's the case. Then the question was, by the time we came back to the DABC meeting, we had sort of learned again that there's no way you can delay the implementation of the ordinance. So that was kind of put to bed. Is there language stipulating what happens if contractors can't physically meet the workforce requirements? And there really isn't language that says what happens if you can't meet that requirement. And so it'd be sort of an enforcement aspect that the city would have to look at if there are, and I don't know if there are any penalties or not, but if you don't meet it. Then if we were to have to delay because we have to now pause and redesign things to meet a higher energy standard, what would that mean for construction inflation? I think we all have remember when we started this process, we understood that the original goals of the bond, we couldn't meet those because we had lost some time and the construction value, our construction costs had increased, and so we lost the ability to do some scope because of that. So there is a real cost to delaying the start of a construction project. So that 6 months, we don't know how much that would be, but there would be a cost associated with delaying going out to bid, and we also don't know if how that would impact the phasing of the projects, because the projects right now are designed to take advantage of the summers where the buildings are not occupied, and we can get a lot more work done. So that's a consideration too. Could there be challenges from an aggrieved party? And so that is that someone could file suit against the projects either during the planning process. Likely that's when it sometimes would come up. And so that is a consideration, but the lawyers are working carefully to make sure that our interpretations have sound legal standing and case precedent, so that we don't have to worry about if there is a challenge, that that we have a clear path for compliance. And so then the last two are when do we decide to resume the work on the projects that have been paused, and that is a decision that hasn't been made yet, but we think we will have fairly short period of time here. I think in the not too distant future, we'll have an understanding of sort of the final determination of the impact and whether we have to just comply with the existing green building code or we have to comply with the Green New Deal. So I think we're really close to understanding that, and we should then be able to come back to you folks and say, here's the impact on the schedule, here's what our revised schedule looks like. So we think certainly by the next time we meet, we'll have that information to everyone, and it may be that we actually have an update go out to everyone before our next meeting. The last item was a conversation that I think we may have started, but it is why did we stop the pre-qualification process? So even though we've put the design on pause, the question is, do we stop our process to pre-qualify general contractors to be able to bid on the projects? And originally, we sort of felt like we needed to pause that because we weren't sure if we were going to be delayed by 6 months and have to redesign the projects, or if any one of them was going to change. And we're looking at a pre-qualification process for all of the projects at one time. So that that process of soliciting qualifications from contractors, evaluating those qualifications to determine if they're suitable to bid on the projects, that is one that, again, we sort of paused when we paused the design. And as I stated, as soon as we know what the impact is to schedule and the scope, which again we think will be fairly soon, then we'll start that process again of the pre-qualification. So we think that's going to start soon here, back up. So and with that was the feedback. So I'll pause before we move to the next step, which is next steps in discussion. I think there's a question by Aura.
Oh, maybe I should wait, Mark. If you're doing next steps, maybe it'll get answered, so I can wait.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move over.
Can I, Mark, just want to drop in, because of when we share the screen, just want to remind folks, sometimes waving your hand on the screen is challenging. If we use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, it's easier to acknowledge you. And I think dropping the questions on the chat has been really helpful too. So just want to remind everyone, how to interrupt Mark. All the different ways we can interrupt Mark. Thank you.
I like being, I'll fall asleep listening to myself drone on, so please interrupt me. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Lisa. And Lisa's going to very briefly kind of talk about what we anticipated next steps are when we put it on pause, and also kind of the actual next steps. So, Lisa?
Thank you, Mark. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Well, good evening. Good to see everyone. As Mark has outlined, we've been busy trying to wrap our arms around what this all means for the BFOF projects. And the steps that you see here on the screen, it says next steps. They're really current steps. This whole process is very fluid. We find out new information, it feels like, almost daily. So essentially what this is outlining is sort of where we started. We paused once it was approved and wanted to quickly, even before it was approved, we were evaluating what this might mean for these projects and trying to understand how that impacts the scope and what modifications, if any, need to happen. The second step outlined here is reviewing options for the DABC. And so really these are hypothetical. So looking at, as we are working through understanding the impact, does that mean we need to pause these projects and delay them so we can understand what that is? And then how long of a delay is that? Is it a delay to all three? Is it a delay to 1, 2? And so really this is just looking at, do we need to delay all three, let's say 6 months, while we try to understand what this means, because we aren't quite clear on what that time frame is for when we will have the answers. And then delay one school 6 months and others longer. Again, hypothetical scenarios as we kind of understand the impact of what this means. And then once we understand, the applicability to the projects and what we need to do in order to comply, looking at what additional scope needs to be added or modified. And does that mean a redesign of the projects, as in allocating scope that we thought were in other areas to address the energy efficiency upgrades driven by the ASHRAE 2019 requirements in the Green New Deal? And so these are the steps that are always kind of in the back of our head as we're learning new things to understand, okay, how long is it until we understand what the impact is? What does that mean? And we're always kind of, every time we get new information, analyzing, how does that impact what we're doing and the scope of the projects. And then on the next slide, it goes over our meeting dates coming up. We'll meet with the DABC again on December 17th. And the next BLAC meetings fall right in that holiday window, so we'll definitely want to honor folks having a pause and having time with their families. And we will reach out to everyone to set up the next BLAC meetings. Probably will be, there's a chance it might be the end of December, but more likely the beginning of January when we pull the group back together. And we'll probably have more information to share with folks at that time as well. It did come up in the last meeting that if we do find out information prior to then, we'll try to make sure that that is communicated to everyone as best we can before things get in papers and things like that, so everyone's informed. And with that, any additional questions or questions that folks have, we are happy to address those.
So, or I'm not sure if your question got answered or not.
Oh yeah, I could ask. So I was just wondering about the item that was on the list regarding potentially, because the plan was in and the fee was paid. I know that was, I believe, Councilor Ray had brought that up about that potentially that might mean that the ordinance wouldn't apply because it was, that might be considered officially kind of the project is in. Is that something that council is trying to, or the city is trying to communicate with us? I'm just wondering, like, how do we get the answer to that, or do we know when that might be determined?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it really we think that the determination is actually going to be, or likely to be, more guidance from legal counsel on that, from the school's legal counsel.
Yeah.
And looking again at case precedent, or and how that's interpreted, and there's actually there is specific language in the ordinance that they're looking at carefully, where it says the ordinance applies one, or is sort of becomes part of the requirement when you submit to, and it gives two tracks. One track is when you submit to planning, and the other one, it says, or building permit, and then there's a stipulation on the building permit, and that is if it doesn't require some level of site review, and I can't remember the terminology. That language is what they're looking at, and feel that it's likely that that means that we have submitted to planning, and if we are confident in that, then we would only have to comply with the existing green building code, and we would pretty much continue on track with what we had been planning or designing. So that's where we're sort of right now waiting just to get an update from them on that, and it may likely be that the Green New Deal does not impact the projects, and we just continue moving.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like it's that specific language of the ordinance, and then also precedent about if that's what needs to be figured out.
Yeah, right. Precedent in terms of their interpretation, how that is. But like I said, they have just started a conversation regarding that, and we should have some update from them shortly.
Thank you. Now, will that go, since this group may not meet we know we don't meet for at least a month, will that, be communicated to DABC or to the school board? Like, how would that information get?
So yeah, go ahead, Superintendent.
Yeah, it will come to me, and I will communicate it appropriately to the board and others.
Great, thanks.
Well, very good. And we appreciate everyone staying with us here. We had the late slot tonight for Presumpscot, so you all did great staying here, listening to us update. Again, it's almost been kind of a roller coaster ride of thinking that that there's going to be a very worst case scenario, and then, well, maybe it's not, and so we're still not sure what the outcome is, but I think we should know shortly, and are anxious to get sort of things back on track and get moving. I know everyone's been waiting a long time for these projects, and we don't want to delay them any more than we have to. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Roberto to maybe conclude tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mark. Before we adjourn, I just want to take a moment and recognize one of our members, one of our committee members, Aura Russell-Better. She, as many of you know, she was elected to serve on the school board to represent her district, which unfortunately means that this slot that she's holding right now as a community member, she's going to have to vacate. However, we see other opportunities for her to continue to remain engaged in the work of BFOF, of all BFOF projects. And I know that she's, personally passionate about the Presumpscot community and this project. So I know that she's going to remain engaged and be a strong advocate for these projects to be seen through. So again, I wanted to recognize all of the work that she's done even before she was a member of this committee to support these projects, and look forward to working alongside with her on the board in a more official role and a decision-making role. And I couldn't think of someone more qualified to oversee these upcoming very important decisions that the board will have to make. So thank you, Aura, for everything you've done. And again, look forward to you being closer to the decision-making bodies. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I didn't even think about that. You're right. I'm not in this role any further. So thank you, everybody, for all of your work, and Mark and Lisa, and for that acknowledgement, Chair. Thank you.
Definitely.
He just fired you very graciously.
Yes, he did.
That's funny, huh? Oh man, no, quite the opposite. That was a very gracious lateral move. So thank you all. I'll take a motion to adjourn. I can't see everyone on the screen, oh, perfect. So if we can take a motion to adjourn, just by raising your hand. All right, so I see Lita, motion by Lita and second by Laura. All those in favor of adjourning our meeting tonight, please indicate, and we'll raise our hands to do so. And so that's unanimous. We've adjourned at 8:24 p.m. Thank you all so much for your time. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.